like at the end of the day, like bad things happen. Bad things happen. That is unfortunately life. It's not necessarily it's the end of the world. It's just a case of sometimes things are horrendous, and it really does take time to get past it or get through it or work through it. But that is life.
Welcome back to the Human or Athlete podcast with this week's guest, Brendan Creed. Brendan is a Team GB hockey player, played over 90 times for them, and played a huge part in them achieving 5th place at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. Brendan and I dive into how we work behind that athlete identity. What makes Brendan such a fascinating guy to talk to is not only his level of awareness and curiosity, but his desire to figure out all these details of these whys and hows to our patterns and programs as to how we work on and off the pitch. This is so valuable to keep growing, to keep learning, and to ultimately reach our potential in a performance kind of way, but equally so just as a human to keep improving that level of awareness and to learn us to understand ourselves as best as possible. Make sure to check us out on all our social media at Human or Athlete and enjoy the episode. Obviously, you know very well in sport, there's a lot of athletes who have this monomaniacal, like single tunnel vision focus towards, achieving and success in their sport and career. And I talk about this probably too much on the podcast, but the culture also around in sport at the moment really supports it. And, you look at Goggins and MJ and Kobe, and it's like we idolize these people who have this obsession towards achieving and stuff like that. And when I've kind of come to understand you and done my research and stuff like that, there's this immediate impression that there is more to you in that it's not this single tightrope and single lane to sport. It doesn't take away from your passion and obviously the hard work that we all put into it, but there is that kind of more well-roundedness, kind of openness to life alongside what you do. Would you agree? And how's that kind of come about in your life?
Yeah, I think the beauty is the fact that you can't make that much money in hockey. So because of that, naturally, you can't be all hell-bent on being the most incredible hockey player with nothing else around it.
Yeah.
So I think from that point of view, there's been, for me, it's been really helpful to have other things, ventures outside that kind of keep me a whole human rather than just a sportsman. And then on the flip side of that, the psychologists that we've had over the past 5 years within the hockey team, the two that we've had with the international stuff have been incredible in terms of just trying to really hit home. It's human first, athlete second, rather than it being athlete first, human second. Because I think the minute you get stuck in that world, I think there's a potential danger that you could lose sight of what you're really trying to achieve. And I think that's for me, it's always been a bit of a danger because I have been in the past as a 15, 16-year-old, I was that kid that was hell-bent on being the best I could be and didn't really care about anything else. And I think thankfully I had a pretty serious injury when I was 16, 17 that kind of turned my world upside down in terms of that and kind of made me realize how much more there is outside of sport. As much as I love it, there is other things going on in the world that obviously you can't really ignore.
You say, I love that you obviously say thankfully, because it's these things, and I talk about them a lot. These are weird things that you kind of end up being grateful for, and the beauty is in seeing that gratitude for them. What happened and kind of what was that experience?
So I was 16. I actually moved to a boarding school within the systems of obviously schooling going into sixth form. So I went to Millfield School, which was obviously an incredible sporting school within the world of schooling. And thankfully it didn't work out the way I thought it would be. They basically promised a lot and didn't really deliver. So I had a pretty tough decision to make at 16 about what I was going to do. And I basically said, do you know what? I'm not going to hang around. I'm going to go back to my old school because the setup I had there was pretty amazing anyway. But I kind of hoped everything else would work out the way it would, but obviously it didn't. And then on the back of that, I basically picked up glandular fever, and then I had a back injury called bilateral spondylolisthesis, which is basically two bones in the spine basically just implode due to pressure. Right. So it's basically a combination of overtraining and growing. So I had basically spinal fractures for 18 months, which over the course of when you're 16 to 18, kind of a lot of people probably wouldn't come back from that injury. Whereas what I did was I kind of distanced myself pretty quickly from sport and kind of just lived life like a normal 16, 17-year-old. So I was kind of like quite thankful because I was that kid that after school every day between the ages of 12 to 15, I would go down to a hockey club because it was en route from home. I would go down and I'd basically train for like an hour and a half every day after school. So I wouldn't really see my mates or anything like that. I was just basically really, really narrow-minded and kind of really focused on basically being the best hockey player that I could be, regardless of anything else. And then I think after that injury kind of made me realize that like friends and family and things like that and just socializing as a kid is like so important. Because I think if I hadn't have had that injury, I think I probably would have gone quite far, but I also would have broken down later on and not had the skills to cope with it anywhere near as much. Whereas actually the skills that I had to pick up at a young age actually helped me quite a lot. And again, thankfully, my career has been plagued with injuries. So actually, like, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't really see an injury as a setback anymore. I just see it more as an opportunity to kind of grow elsewhere. And that kind of, for me, has been pretty lucky with the latest big injury big injury. It's not that big to me, but to others, it probably would be quite a big injury. So kind of that point of view has kind of helped me out quite a lot along the way. So I'm actually not necessarily, don't really regret any of my injuries because it's kind of shaped who I am now and kind of pretty thankful for it.
Yeah, and it's crazy that these things can do that to people. Like for myself, it was a very similar thing. Like I ruptured the ligaments of my ankle about when I was like 18 kind of thing. And that was like, whoa, like right as I was trying to transition to kind of 23's professional football and get a new professional contract. And I did all that. And I'm like, everything's like kind of, you've lost it all, but you've also created the space to grow and to kind of learn a lot more about yourself or the world around you. So it's a real kind of win and loss, but there is so much to win if you kind of see that perspective. It's really interesting in this culture that these things are like prized, like to be that kind of 15, 16-year-old like you were, that is that dedicated and that kind of single-minded. And it's a real, because obviously there's so much risk and reward to it and so much pain that isn't dealt with or that is used kind of, you know, maybe addictively and over like too much. How have those like psychologists, like you said at GB Hockey, helped with that human first, athlete second, and that whole approach to that relationship with yourself?
That's a tough question. They basically, to put it simply, we went through a process which is called the why process, which is basically trying to understand basically why you live the way you do. So what it requires you to do is to basically go back in time and pick out key points in your life where something may have happened or impacted your career, basically. And kind of, I think the beauty of it is the fact that it kind of changes the way you view the things that have happened in the past, because naturally at the time, so for example, myself, I was bullied as a child. So if I look back at that when I was 10, 11, what that made me do was maybe basically find a safe haven in the world of sport, because it was a place where there's rules, you can't be bullied, you can't have anything like that. So actually what it gave me was a safe space to basically be myself. So when I look back, I think, I was this really, really dedicated kid and this, that, and the other, and it was all my own doing. But actually what actually transpired was the fact that I was pretty insecure as a kid, and actually the safe space that was there for me was the sporting world. So actually, like, you kind of basically piece together the reasons why you do certain things and the reasons why you act in certain ways, and kind of, I think the beauty of it was the fact that you had a choice of whether you did it with someone really close to you, like a girlfriend or a partner or anything like that, or you basically spoke to a psychologist and you worked it through with them. So I did it with one of the psychologists because I wasn't really sure who to do it with. And I was in the middle of like a coffee shop in middle of Marlow. I'm bawling my eyes out completely. I'm like, and I'm just in a world of bother. Yeah. I came away from the meeting and I was like, I feel like nothing's been resolved. And I was looking for like this perfect answer of basically being like, this is the reason, da 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 da. But actually what I learned was that over the next 6 months, I gradually worked it out myself. So it wasn't necessarily looking for an answer as such, but looking just for an understanding. And I think that's what they were brilliant at, is just kind of setting you up for the next thought process and the next understanding of basically why you are how you are. And kind of, I think the journey that within the squad, the amount of people that actually began to understand themselves a lot more and then had an understanding for how they interact with others and everything else, made you realize that it's not necessarily like, it is an elite world in which we are in. But the interesting thing was the fact that people started treating each other much more like humans rather than just an athlete. And then suddenly the connections you then make on a different level to what you were previously kind of gives you that next base layer and next support layer. And kind of that's the thing that was really interesting that I think people got on board with quite quickly.
That's amazing. It's pretty much like, sounds like that kind of psychodynamic counseling of understanding your childhood and stuff like that. And it's really weird because I spoke to obviously Felix Denea on the podcast as well. And he was talking about their journey in Belgium. And it's very like kind of similar in that they look to build the deeper kind of connections within the squad and the team first as a priority, obviously with the accomplishments and the wins to come later, but to build that as people and as friends and to understand that whole thing and to be doing that in a kind of similar way, but also that team approach as to everyone's doing it at the same time, trying to understand themselves. Like it must create that incredible camaraderie, that kind of, you're doing at the same time, that depth, and then obviously connecting with that depth and stuff like that is like, that creates the relationships and the teamwork that is incredible. And that's what you love to see in elite sport.
Yeah, they're a unique group in the fact that they've been together for 8-12 years. So they're naturally probably a lot further along, just simply because of the amount of time they've spent together and the amalgamation of the time they've spent together. Yeah. Whereas our system was a little bit different in the fact that it's like pockets of age groups that come through. So ours is a little bit different, but the same principle, as you say, is kind of what you're aiming to do, basically build a camaraderie that at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, you guys hold together firm. And I think the funny thing about it is not necessarily on the pitch stuff, but it's also the off the pitch stuff. So when you realize what people are going through within their lives, kind of the support networks, not only there on the pitch, but it's that off the pitch side of things that kind of make a huge difference. And that's the bit that when you realize how close people really are, is that off the pitch side of the world. And again, it sounds very similar to what the Belgian guys went through, but it's what we were aiming to do as a group. And I think thankfully we achieved that.
Yeah, it's special. And it's like knowing the stigma around sport, and especially like football in the wide world that I'm in, to see this at this elite level, the way that it's being approached, to understand people, like truly understand them, and not just deal with these stigmas and surface level type, personalities, and to break them down and really, like, it's so cool to see that at this approach in sport. And, maybe who knows whether, football's behind or not, like that's another stereotype in itself, but that whole relationship with that and understanding people, to see that come about in sport the way that it is, and people to value it as like, this is how we grow and improve. Like, that's so cool to see that as like people.
Yeah, I wonder if you look at, my fascination would be if you look at like your best man managers in the world. So you look at your Ancelottis, you look at your Klopps, you look at Guardiolas, you kind of look at those guys and you wonder how much they've tapped into the world of sports psychology. Because there must be something that they're doing differently to others to basically maximize what they get out of the groups that they have. And that's the kind of like the thing I've always been. I've done so much reading on the psychology stuff, and there's a book called The Culture Code, which I'm like by a guy called Daniel Elliott. I'm fascinated by, and it's kind of like the idea behind it is basically that you create a vulnerability and you create a safe space. So as a leader, you basically show vulnerability and you create a safe space for people. And for me, that kind of like that understanding of basically showing a bit of vulnerability as a leader. So you have at the top, whether or not they know everything specifically about tactics, coaching, all that side of things. It seems to be that if you have an unbelievable man manager at the top, then you can kind of go from there and kind of build from there. But the stuff I've read about it, I'm fascinated by it. And I wonder if football has, because I think other sports probably, because there's not as much money, they have to tap into that extra world of all the things alongside and the things outside of the box and kind of outside the bubble of what normally is assumed. I think they have to tap into that because they haven't got the money to do it. Whereas I wonder if football hides behind the money in the fact that the classic money doesn't create happiness, but it helps. Like, I wonder if there's a bit of that where people are like, well, I'm earning 70K a week, so I'm not that bothered. Whereas for us, we're earning not even a 5% of that. Like, you kind of, to bring it back down to earth, like it's not a well-paid job again. So kind of the happiness has to come from elsewhere. And if you're doing the psychology alongside, there is a hell of a lot more in terms of the happiness and the general vibe of what we're going about is kind of I feel much better, but obviously I'm outside of that bubble, so I don't know too much about the football side of things.
Well, like it's super interesting because it is that whole kind of money situation and stuff like that. And you look at where all the money's pumped into, it's understanding the 0.5%, the 1% in all the physical aspects, stuff that can be seen and monitored and checked and understood. You know, everything from all the new technology, and look at America with the colleges, it's like the amount of money that goes into all that research. And then over like the last 5-6 years, the nutrition's been like huge. Look at vegan and vegetarianism and all that kind of things. And it's like, we still know absolutely nothing about like the mind and the neuroscience and the brain. And we're just kind of literally just trying to understand it before we all make, these technologies come into play. And there's also kind of we can't see this stuff physically, or like we said, we can't understand it. So how are people going to be able to put money into these things? From a financial perspective, it seems absurd. But then it's this human connection, this kind of love and authenticity to people as to how they work and interact, that is, money can't really define it. And we haven't really put a price tag on it yet in this world because we don't understand it. And so then it's so interesting to see how much value it actually brings. And like you said, how because of the money, it might not be seen and valued as much in football.
Yeah, I just love to see what the difference is and kind of just have a look at the insides of a football club and see how it works. I know one of the ex-GB women hockey players, a woman called Helen Richardson-Walsh, she's just moved into the world of psychology with Tottenham Hotspur's women's football team. So I'd love to see like that side of things and how it plays out, because I just think there's so much of an impact that can be made. But I think, as you say, because it's not tangible at the moment, because there's not like I can see that person's running that 0.5 seconds faster, as you say, like, because there's not that at the moment. I wonder if that's not like I don't know if it's worth investing. Not sure. Rather than going, actually, do you know what? We've got enough money here. Let's actually put something in and just see what happens. Let's see if the group suddenly are a bit more cohesive. Then suddenly a 2-1 loss might become a 2-2 draw, just because of a bit of camaraderie and people just working that little bit harder because they understand each other a little bit more. Or you suddenly get that fluidity between two players because there's a bit more understanding away from the pitch that just happens to actually make them connect on the pitch. Like I think there's so much I've said it to my mates at home, there's so much untapped in the world in terms of that I'd be fascinated just to see what the connections would be. And I'd love to be that person that would be able to do it. Sadly, not there yet. But in terms of that, I'd love to just be like a fly on the wall to see if that work's going on at the moment. And if it's not, there's clearly a huge market for it. Whereas you can see it's happening in other sports and kind of the psychologists, or simply just someone just being just a human being alongside them. So your classic is like a physio or an S&C coach, just being a bit more human rather than treating somebody strictly as an athlete, but suddenly asking on a Monday, like, oh, how was your weekend? Oh, what'd you get up to? Rather than just being like, right, here's the program, let's go, let's crack on. And that kind of, you don't realize until you're in that elite environment, you don't realize how much of an impact it would be. And you also don't realize most of the time until you've left that environment. So for myself, coming abroad this year and playing in Europe, it's a very different feel to how it would be at home.
Yeah.
Some parts good, some parts are great, and some parts aren't as good as home. And kind of it's understanding the like differences and just working out basically how life works as a human rather than just as an athlete.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Like you said, I think there is that kind of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how England are portrayed and seen. And, you know, obviously we don't see that much, like you said, behind the scenes, but there is that, you can see that it's changed. And obviously Gareth is huge on that sort of stuff. So that is a kind of real positive that you see that there is something going on there. You know, look at the way it's all kind of run. It's definitely up there, I'd say, with all these other things. But then you look at the Premier League and you're like, don't know if it's like actually kind of there yet, but it's interesting. If we go back to vulnerability, like you said, and it's always for someone who's kind of faced, I guess I haven't spoken too much about it on here, I'm in my own journey, but it's someone who's faced the insecurities and the vulnerability, and also, you know, you have that sensitivity to life because of it. How has that affected you from, you know, being bullied as a child? What was that experience like, and how has that led you and developed you into who you are in the athlete world as well? That, how does that sensitivity correlate alongside that?
It's so I basically went into my shell as a kid, basically as a real youngster, and then gradually you find your way out of it. So I went from basically being physically beaten by a guy, to then going through school, and then basically through senior school, I kind of just, sport was my world, and that was kind of who I was, and that was my identity, was just a sportsman. And academically, I'm not stupid, but I also don't test very well at all. I get quite stressed, I get quite panicky, so I don't ever do well in tests on that side of things. But probably the biggest thing for me was the guy who actually bullied me died when I was about 15, 16. And and it was like an open funeral, everybody could go in the town, and he was a really well-liked guy in the town. So for me, I actually held it against myself for ages that I didn't go to his funeral, because I kind of didn't really know anything about him. So I kind of just held that against myself, being like, God, you're such an idiot. Like, why didn't you go? Like, it was your opportunity to basically understand basically why it happened. And I still resent not going now, but nowhere near to the same point. But that kind of, for me, was a big eye opener into the fact that I've basically I'm pretty critical on myself. So I'm the definition of a perfectionist. So for example, I won't leave until I've done it right, and I won't stop doing it until I've done it right. And if I play in a game, so if I'm playing an international and I do 56 things right and 4 things wrong, I won't care about the 56 good things. I'll only focus on the 4 bad things. And that kind of, I used to go into real downhill spirals when I was an athlete, early doors. So in my early junior career, I would get brought off, I get subbed and things like that, and basically just be like, you need to sort yourself out type thing. So I kind of learned kind of the hard way of basically building around. And then, as I say, thanks to the 2 psychologists, I've kind of got myself out of that downhill spiral thing. So now if it's just a mistake, it's just a mistake, and that's it. But the other thing is I went from a forward, basically had the spinal fractures, and came back as a defender just because my team basically didn't have a defender. Okay. So I was like, look, I'll do it. I got no problems with that. Yeah. So I basically played all the junior international stuff as a forward, as a midfielder, kind of that creative midfielder, and then basically came back as a centre back and kind of learned again the hard way that if you make a mistake, it probably going to cost you a goal, which probably didn't help with the whole negative spiral thing. So naturally, I'm kind of in a pretty dangerous world on that side of things. So I was a perfectionist that had a real negative attitude towards himself. So naturally, that's not exactly a healthy place to be in terms of as an athlete. But over the course of the past 5 years, I've kind of learned to kind of get myself out of it and more understand of what people need from me, rather than look at it from a completely selfish way is kind of turn myself outwards and be like, Christ, my body language is terrible here. Christ, my voice is terrible here. Like in terms of like how I'm communicating with people, and what I have now become is a lot calmer and a lot more relaxed in terms of, I probably look quite relaxed a lot of the time just because that's who I am now compared to what I was at the start, where I was a bit more frantic, a bit more panicky, a bit more, oh God, I might make a mistake here. Whereas now I'm like, actually, I'm in control of this situation. So it has the early doors of the insecurities and the kind of what went on as a kid has definitely basically did shape a lot, probably 10 years of me playing. And then kind of, as I'm getting that little bit older and a little bit more of an understanding of it, it kind of has not necessarily shaped the way, but kind of I'm now understanding it, so I can now use it a bit more and manipulate it a bit more, which is kind of where I'm at in terms of the competency of it. Whereas 4 years ago, if you asked me the same question, I'd be like, yeah, I'm a nightmare. I'm an absolute nightmare, just because of where I was on that journey. Whereas, I mean, 4 years of playing in an elite environment kind of does naturally do that. But then the work that's gone on outside has been monumental in terms of helping me get to where I've got to.
Yeah, and I think it credits to you firstly for the honesty and for going through this journey and recognizing the time it's taken and I guess obviously the journey that you've had to go on. I think that's pretty incredible, and to be able to see it like that is pretty, I think it makes it very special knowing that you've done that work to work on that and those insecurities and those fears, because again, it's not tangible work, it's not obvious work, and a lot of people don't see it, but to sit with yourself and do that is inspiring. It amazes me because I know I'm pretty similar, and again, I'm 21, so I'm still on that journey myself, and I know I don't know if like I can say, but tens, if not hundreds, from their body language and from kind of how they think and talk and work, going through the same similar thing, and that really, I was always, it's quite sad, but it's quite scary, because it's like there are so many people who think and work because of reasons, probably most of the time off the pitch or off, outside of the sport, that have created this sensitivity, and then going into a world in that we work in, it's incredibly pressure driven, result driven, and like you said, as a perfectionist, that's the only way out of that situation, or we think at the time, is achieving and being perfect. And so it's a really difficult blend, I guess, and like a way to work it out with all this. And knowing for myself that's going through it, there's obviously incredible ups through it where you have this sensitivity, like this is an absolute blessing, or I've worked this hard and used that insecurity or whatever. Like for me, I know that I use preparation and hard work as something that I fall back on. If I've worked this hard or I've done this, then I can go into this and hold my head high and work like that. But then at the same time, if that preparation hasn't been perfect, I'm vulnerable to the fears that I'm vulnerable to not being in control, which is obviously where you said you've grown a lot. And so it's just crazy to know that there's so much was issues with that and difficulty with that we're all going through, and that it isn't maybe recognized as to that whole sensitivity as a curse, as a blessing, and all these kind of things, especially in a pressure world.
Yeah, so two things kind of, off the back of basically the bullying, I had a heavy bout with suicide in terms of like planning it. So how
old were you at the time?
So I was like 10, 11. I was pretty young, but the kind of, yeah, kind of like basically the talk of everything kind of got to a stage that I was like, I'm going to do it. And kind of what I then had to basically strip myself back to at that stage was kind of basically, why are you doing it? Like, and just kind of from that stage, there was already that curiosity and understanding it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of that is kind of, that's where the selfish thought process started. So when I started making mistakes, I'd be like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough for this world. I'm not good enough. That kind of, and constantly going back to the same questions. That I'm at 20, probably last year. So 27 was when I really started breaking down those questions. So that's 16, 17 year holding on to it. And the irony is that actually, if I'd have talked to someone about it earlier, yeah, it might have worked. But at the same time, I'd seen psychologists when I was younger, and I had no interest in talking to them about it because I'd pushed it so far down into the deep souls of the body. I just had no interest talking about it. So I used to have real anger management issues as a kid, unsurprisingly. So I used to play tennis quite a lot. I used to really enjoy it. But the problem is because of dads and sisters' jobs in the world of law, I hated injustice. So if someone cheated, that would automatically. So if someone caught, because obviously as a kid, you call your own line. So obviously if it's in, it's in. If it's out, it's out. Yeah. Whereas I would get so annoyed if I knew it was in and someone would say it was out, to the point that I would just start basically smashing balls at people in terms of legitimately in the game. But I would just start body targeting people because I was just like, how can you cheat? I don't understand this. This is backwards. So that was kind of like I should have probably noticed that was a bit of a sign. Do
you know what's crazy here is that is so like similar to the kind of thing that I went through in that I played tennis a lot when I was out in Switzerland as a kid, and it was like I used to have massive anger issues as well, throw my rackets, like scream swear words as loud as I could every time I messed up. And then there was one where it was like a champions tiebreak third set, like pretty important kind of qualifying tournament, and it was like 7-8 or something, like right down to the wire, like 9 o'clock in the evening, and the ball bounced twice and like on his side, and I've called it and kind of turned around to finish the point. He's played on and stuff like that, and obviously both our dads are there, and I've gone like, he's bounced twice, and he's gone, no, it hasn't. And it turned into like this whole thing, and his dad was like questioning like everything. It's this memory that I always kind of come back to, is like I ended up being like so like anxious. I was literally shaking for like my next serve and like visibly crying during it, and I ended up pulling through and winning it. And it's something that I look back on and goes like, those kind of moments, there's something not quite right in that whole system. But that experience is so similar. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I used to get really emotional when we lost as well. So I was just like, I just hate losing. I still hate losing now. I just don't get anywhere near it as emotional majority of the time. But it's like, there's a lot more understanding now as to what I'm going through. And things like cheaters, I can't deal with. I still can't. And I really struggle with now. So if someone dies or something like that, I'm just like, I go into a different person. And it's funny because now I know I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can catch myself. There's still times where I don't. And I'm just like, I've had it here. I'm just going to let fly at this bloke. But that's just the way I am. And I've kind of got used to that a little bit more. But yeah, I just find it's really interesting. Like the journey, as you say, like the pressure world that we're in, but kind of, it's more of an understanding of the pressure world that we're in. So that, as you say, like if somebody's got a normal 9 to 5 and their job is to basically deliver throughout the 9 to 5, it's an 8-hour period where you've got to try and deliver. That's ridiculous. We're not machines. So when I speak to my mum about it and I'm like, oh, how's your day? And she was like, yeah, it was all right. I was on my feet a lot. And I was like, oh yeah? So it's like, yeah, I only got like a 15-minute break for lunch. Yeah. I'm like, what? That makes zero sense. Like I'm in a world where I train for 2 hours and then I get a 4-hour gap so that I can recover for the next training. And I'm like, I'm tired from that. And I'm like, it's not really the same, but kind of like, I just don't understand why there's no like in the business world, like the sporting world's obviously better at it because it naturally has to be, but that kind of ability just to give people breaks and understand the human side of it. And actually like, I remember reading in the book, I remember reading it as about, they talk about interactions as a big thing. So it's called, so basically the idea is that you basically create more and more interactions between workers, basically solve more problems and problems quicker. Yeah. So the interesting thing is like, so this guy basically had a building that had 4 entrances and exits and he closed 3 of them because naturally by everyone coming through the same door and leaving through the same door, suddenly you create so much more connections. And they worked out that actually by moving basically tables around and basically moving people around, so the whole like rotation of the room and that kind of stuff just created more connections. And kind of what it then did was then suddenly somebody from one department works with somebody from a different department, and then you have a different idea of how to solve it. And kind of again, it comes back to that kind of like connecting side of things. And at the end of the day, we're social animals. Like, we're not great on our own as humans just because we're just not used to it. So then why would you ever like want to put people on their own? And I guess that's the beauty of team sport. And tennis doubles was my big thing.
Oh, no way.
I absolutely loved it, because what you do is you connect with somebody and then you just go and have a laugh for an hour and a half. And actually for me, like I've always said it from day one, whether it's elite sport or whether it's normal sport, if I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to do it. So the minute I stop enjoying hockey is the minute I'm like, I'm done, I'm canning it. That's fine.
Yeah.
And what I've now understood is that enjoyment comes in different forms. And what I love now is the challenge and the challenge to myself. Whereas previously it was always about winning. It was always about trying to get the most out of this game, and we're not giving up until the final whistle. And yeah, I still do the same things, but actually now it's about understanding the journey and kind of actually the enjoyment of just learning again. So it's almost like a cycle back to school in terms of that understanding and kind of actually what am I doing here? Well, now I'm learning a lot more about the people that I'm working with and the connections I'm making on the pitch. So actually then I take that away and I'm like, do you know what? Like, yeah, we lost 3-2 or whatever. Yeah, I'm fuming because we've lost, fine. But what I'm understanding now is actually I'm still gaining stuff from each experience. And that's always been my big motto in life, is like, mistakes are only mistakes if you don't learn from them. So the minute you learn from them, they automatically go as an experience. So naturally, the only reason you're going to be making mistakes is if you're not willing to have that extra capacity to learn. So that's fine.
Yeah.
Because I'm always going to hold myself accountable to basically, am I making mistakes or am I learning from them? And if I'm making mistakes, then I've got to go back. I've got to watch the footage. I've got to make sure I'm taking something out of it. Whereas if I'm like, I made a mistake, actually, but the next time I got the ball, I actually did a different thing and it worked. Fine, that's an experience then. That's a learning curve.
Yeah.
So I think I wish I'd had that when I was like 16, 17. That would have been great. But at the same time, I quite enjoy the fact that I'm now learning it, because again, as I say, I'm still learning. I'm 28. My career's not done yet. I've still got many more years if I want to carry on.
Yeah.
There's also that bit after the sporting career where at the end of the day, as I said at the start, like that's not just who I am, is that's Brendan Creed, the sportsman. I'm now Brendan Creed, the human, and kind of that bit is where I've thankfully got myself into as a headspace where I'm on to the next bit as well, which is quite cool.
Well, I think that's the huge part in that journey, and the way you've just explained it as to how you act on that is, I guess, facing your fears to this is who I am. This is what comes with me, whether it be your insecurities, whether it be your fears, and by owning up to them, whether it be consciously or not, you can then face those mistakes that are on the surface level from whatever game or whatever situation they may be, own up to them, face them head on with the honesty and the responsibility that this is where something I can learn from. And that only comes from realizing who you are as, and facing what is in you already, because the two, you can't look at one situation honestly from a biased perspective of how you see yourself. Like doesn't work. But you've shown that step in that honesty towards yourself and courage in a way. And that's something that obviously takes time and as we go, but it is that courage to face yourself and with that, your mistakes, because a lot of the time, like you said, not trying to counsel you, but in that childhood, those fears and, abandonment and all these kind of not good enough and insecurities that are there are mistakes in your eyes that you've carried with you from such a young age. And so they're the bigger mistakes that you've carried with you. And so then we obviously put pressure on the little ones and beat ourselves up and trigger it in a way, right? We trigger the pain. And so when we can face the little ones, it means that we've also come to, some sort of terms or are working to manage the bigger ones.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of, I think the interesting thing from that is kind of, I really struggle with, and for me as a person, I really struggle with people who can't face things. So for example, like I really struggle with, so the two things that I look for in people is one is courage and two is authenticity. They're the two big things that I like. Kind of third is probably humor, but I'm not too fussed if humor's not there all the time. But the first two are the big ones for me. And kind of that side of things is, if you have an ability if you have courage, if you see something that's not right, you're going to speak up about it straight away, because it automatically takes courage to be able to call someone out on something that you don't think's right. Whether you're right or not in the first place, that's a different matter, but at least you have the courage to do it. And the second thing is authenticity and just knowing you and knowing yourself. So I really struggle if someone doesn't own up to something that they've made a mistake on.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if we're in a game and I mispass a ball and they put it in the back of the net, I'm the first person to put my hand up and be like, lads, I've let you down there. I'm sorry.
Is this something new or something that you've kind of always had?
Always. It's because, and again, it goes back to my childhood, my parents, my dad and my sister have been in the law world. So for that, there's always that bit of kind of just making sure you're doing things right. And that for me is a big, like, at the end of the day, if you're not holding yourself accountable to your own standards and your own, and that if that's your standards and you're quite happy to let them slip, that's on you, that's fine. But you're not going to do it under my watch. And kind of that for me is kind of like what I've always stuck to, is those two big things. And the people that hold themselves dear to that are the people that are probably closest to me in terms of that side of things. So for me, in like an elite world, like if you've got a bluffer, if you've got somebody who's quite happy, not really holding themselves accountable, like that for me is like it's a dangerous thing to have within an environment, because unfortunately it's not normally happens that they suddenly fall out of it and come out a different way. Normally it's they drag other people into their kind of standards and their way of doing things. And that's the danger. Yeah. What it is. But for me, those two are the big things that kind of, the minute you get those two aligned and kind of everything else kind of follows suit. Yeah. I just find it fascinating, like looking at the way like teams resolve problems and kind of how they go about it. And normally it comes down to those two things. It's courage of someone to step up and say, lads, we need to sort this out here. And with that naturally comes the authenticity of being true and honest to themselves and being true and honest to the group. Some people like it and some people don't. And that's the nature of the business. Like you can't, and that's the sad thing that I've learned over the 5 years, is that like the last 5 years being in an elite environment, is the fact that sometimes people aren't going to be happy with the decision, but what it has to come from is from a place of honesty and a place of trust to then deliver it. And by delivering it honestly and with trust, you're naturally showing vulnerability. So from that point of view, kind of, then suddenly it's not an argument of, so let's say someone gets dropped in an elite team. It's not a case of arguing about it. It's a case of, all right, the understanding's automatically there because it's come from truth and it's come from honesty. And because it's coming from a place where, they're not necessarily saying you're not good enough. They're just saying, for this situation, I've gone with this because there might be someone better. Not necessarily saying you're not good enough. You are. There's just someone better. And that's the world of elite sport. And that's the world of what we're in. And that's, I think, the minute you start chucking things around in terms of a bit of a lie and a bit of like an unnecessarily bit of like mind games with it, I think it becomes a very dangerous world, unfortunately. Because as you say, at the end of the day, we're all humans. There's going to be insecurities there. And especially if let's say, for example, you hold yourself as a footballer and a footballer only, and then a coach comes along and says, Ellie, I'm not going to pick you this week. Why? Yeah, you weren't great on Thursday. You're like, what? Like, one day? Are you joking? But unfortunately, like that happens in team sports, and that's what I find really interesting, when like teams suddenly go from doing really, really well, same manager, and then suddenly it drops off, and you're like, something's happened. I'd love to know what's happened, because something big must have happened within the group that's created a little bit of distrust. There's probably not some honesty in there. There's probably not vulnerability in there, and then suddenly it just goes, and you can see it happening week in, week out, and it just goes further and further. But yeah, I absolutely find it fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And for me, we had this coach. He's a brilliant kind of manager, and he's brought some incredible players through from a young level at Man United and stuff like that. And he had this thing. He came and did this presentation, and it was hilarious because he targeted kind of at me because I was I had a good relationship with him, like to joke around, but I'm always someone that would do that extra bit. And I questioned him once, and I'd come back from injury and questioned whether this was right. And it was about, we'd lost the races and he'd wanted us to walk through these like puddles that were like this big in this like field off the side of the training ground. And the losing team had to run through it. And I was like, I can't do that. I've come back from injury, just did not. It was cold, wet, winter morning. And I'd done it in the end, but tentatively, and kind of questioned all of that sort of thing. And for someone who I'd kind of seen myself as like, I can lead this and be myself, he'd picked up on it straight away. And so he come in and he gets this PowerPoint that he'd had at United up. And it was basically, you're gonna have to blur my language or whatever, but it said fit in or fuck off. And he'd broken it down into terrorists in the group. And I can't remember the other ones, maybe leaders and terrorists, and how and it was an old United one with Fergie. And basically the terrorists were basically people, as you say, that weren't honest, were basically created those things and would drag the majority of the group that way towards an environment that isn't as, as hardworking and as honest. And the other people, and he made a real big point of singling me out for that one moment of that, and reminding me of I'd come back from injury and stuff like that, and doing all that. So it was a real kind of moment, like, whoa, like this is a thing, and you have to check yourself here. And it's really interesting because you talk about those standards of kind of honesty and authenticity and courage. And it's really interesting because I find a lot of, and this is from my own experience as well, is with the amount of insecurity and, with, again, in a broad way, everyone's broken to some extent on different scales. It's really interesting to see the expectation of courage from other people, because that comes out of their own fear and insecurity, because they don't have it themselves. And I know I've been in situations myself, honestly, where I've expected that of other people out of my own insecurity, because that's what I don't have. And so I call people out for not having it themselves. And that's a really interesting thing, because I think in a team environment, it's like a negative expectation of others, and it leads to moaning and complaining and putting other people down to make you feel better. That's like the surface level implications of it, but it comes from the fear itself. So it's not like an authentic expectation of others. It's a real fear and insecure expectation of others, because that's how you're feeling about yourself. Like, it's like if you hate yourself, you hate others. If you love yourself, you love them. And it's like those things. And I think that's really interesting at the highest level, and what you're obviously, it seems like you're doing at GB, in that you're breaking that down to get a real authentic, courage and expectation of others, not one coming out of fear and insecurity.
Yeah, it's funny, like the Kiwi version, the All Black stuff is leave your ego at the door. That's the same principle of kind of, probably without the swearing on that side of things. Kind of like, that's the impact they're saying, is basically like, if you've got an attitude, don't bother. Like, we're not here for that. The funny thing is you still get people who aren't authentic. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. It's just human nature.
Yeah.
But as you say, like that, the minute you hear things that are a little bit more personal, and you can tell when there's a meaning behind an insult, and kind of that's always been my fascination with that side of things. I think it's really interesting. But as you say, that insecurity, the kind of like, the minute you can start breaking it down, so you have those conversations away from the pitch that kind of then give you a bit more of an understanding of somebody, I think is so important. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I had something to say, but I've forgotten it. Oh. No, I've forgotten it. It's gone through my head.
It'll come back. But
I hope so.
But it is that. It's how, like, understanding yourself. And it was a quote that I remember was like, going through your own darkness and realizing that allows you to be the light for other people when they're going through it.
I've remembered it. So we had so the psychologist, I remember it, we like broke it down, and we do the personality in terms of like understanding. So you have like, I think there's an insights one, there's so many different versions, but the one we had was from the psychologist. We had a guy called Tim Pitt. It was a thing called Spotlight. He's from the company that he works for called Mindflick. And it's really interesting because it basically labeled me as an energizer. So I was an energizer. So what I have an ability to bring people with me. But on the flip side, I also have an ability to drag people down with me if I want to. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't realize for the first two and a half years of my senior international career was that I was quite an up and down person. consistently. Like one week would be unbelievable, best thing in the world. Next week, absolute nightmare. I'd be dragging people through the dirt with me and I'd have no idea about it. And then we did a team building weekend actually, which was it was so bizarre but fascinating at the same time. So we had a team building weekend at Loughborough University with it was with, I'm trying to think of the way to describe them. It was with one of the top negotiating groups.
Would have been like Black Swan Group.
I couldn't tell you what it was called. I just know it was with
the FBI guy. Was it the FBI guy?
No, it was with actual negotiators.
Oh, okay. So no, Chris Voss is the guy I'm on about. I don't know if
no, it's not that guy. So we did a weekend with those guys, and then at the end of this weekend, there was basically like it was just an incredibly humbling experience, kind of going through it. And then at the end of the weekend, you basically sat in small groups, and you basically told people one thing that you think is great and one thing that you wish they would stop worrying about. And I had a guy in my group who I've grown up with since I was 8. We've played county together. We've played regionals together. We went to university together. We're both now playing for GB seniors. We're now both in Europe. So he's just down the road in Eindhoven.
No way.
So I actually saw him Monday. But he was basically just like, I just wish you would stop being so selfish. And I was like, I don't think I'm selfish at all. Like, what are you on about? Like in my head, I'm like, what are you on about? So I just asked him, I was like, what do you mean? He was like, you don't realize that when you're in a negative spiral, it's not only you that you affect, but it is the people that are around you that have to then worry about you. So actually what you're doing is you're just dragging all the focus onto yourself, basically saying, I'm not good enough. And it was quite like a humbling day where I was like, wow. And then the more I sat and thought about it, I was like, yeah, you're right. That's bang on. And then the psychologist basically broke it down and said, it's because you're an energizer. So when things are going great, you're one of the best people to have around. And when things aren't, you're one of the worst. But like in a nutshell. And he was like, what we're trying to do is not necessarily take away your positive energy, but it's trying to drag your negative up. So then what you do is your peaks and troughs are smaller, but you're just in a more positive range. And ever since that kind of discussion, it's kind of got me to where I've wanted to be in terms of that side of things. So actually what I am now is a lot more consistent as a person, which then naturally means because I'm more consistent as a person, it then means it translates onto the pitch as well. So then what you get is not necessarily someone who is so up and down and, oh my God, everything's gone to the toilet. It's actually like, nah, it's not actually that bad. It's just one or two small things that if we just sort out quickly, suddenly everything's back to good and we're all fine. And that was kind of like a really interesting thing because during my international career, I've only ever missed one tournament. It was the World Cup. So during the 5-year cycle prior to the Olympics was the biggest tournament. And I basically didn't get selected because the coach couldn't trust me. Because of the nature of position, and he was like, you're just too much of a threat to the team. And for me, as like a 25, 26-year-old then, I was like, that's pretty horrendous to kind of take. And then I had a choice of either I go and basically, as you say, the insecurities, I then go and be like, to go find people and be like, what's he talking about? He's talking rubbish. Like, this is a joke. Or I go, do you know what? I've got to be honest with myself here and be like, actually, yeah, he's bang on. And so I thankfully chose that route and kind of went about actually just being like, do you know what? Yeah, he is right. I am actually not helping people here. This isn't great. And thankfully, because I did that, it actually made me into a better player, even over the course of like 2 months. It sorted me out rather than I was in a rut before and then had some pretty horrendous news. And you do have an option where you go one or two ways. You either go, he's talking out of his arse and you just stay on that rut, or you go, do you know what? I'm at the depths of things here, actually. The only way is up here. Come on, let's sort ourselves out. So I'm pretty thankful, like the two times that people have probably questioned me as a hockey player, or the two major times people have questioned me, I've gone, do you know what? Yeah, you've got a point there, and actually be a little bit humble with the information and not throw your toys out the pram and think everything's horrendous and everybody hates me and the world's against me. It's actually like, no, they're just trying to help. And if I'm open to it, suddenly that changes everything. And of course, as you say, in the football world, you probably come across that a lot more where There's probably a little less understanding from the player's point of view. And I think, unfortunately, the older you get, the better you get at it. But the harder conversations happen early doors. So the guys who get knocked for 6 early doors but keep plugging away, so the guys who get told that at like 9, 10, they suddenly get to 18, 19, and they've got a different level of drive and a different level of basically being able to take hits.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, well, what happened? He's like, well, bad things happened as a kid. I remember reading sounds weird. I remember reading a study. It was about basically major kids in elite sport who have had major impacts against them. So it's like a death of a family member, it's a illness, it's a major injury, and all this, that, and the other. And kind of, if you look at a lot of major athletes, something probably has happened. And if they haven't, they're incredibly lucky. But normally what happens is someone's had a big setback along the way and kind of found their way to work around it, or a way to understand it and attack it head on. It's really interesting, like when you actually think about that, and then you get to the world where I'm at now, for example, like I'm 28, and there's another, let's say, for example, in hypothetical world, there's another 28-year-old next to me, and we both get equally bad news. Because I've had probably a rougher route to get there, I'm probably better at dealing with the rough news than someone who's had it pretty plain, easy sailing and everything else. And then they just go, just collapse and just basically just stop. And it's kind of, I find that like fascinating.
There's no coincidence that all these greats, these incredible people have these incredible stories behind them. There is no coincidence that that's how it works. And that's one of my kind of things that I say to myself, is this is just another chapter to my incredible story that makes it even sound even more incredible as to how I got there. And I completely agree with you and fascinated by it as well, because it is about that. And that's when I then come back and we go right full circle back to the beginning when we're talking about that sensitivity and that insecurity as a curse or a blessing. And it can really be that curse in that this is how you hold on to things. But there is that opportunity for it to make you into someone incredible. All the rejections, all the, the fears and the things that have happened to people, that's what stimulates something in you to, like you said, learn to deal with it, to create some self-awareness, to create that something in you that just will not be broken and get back and will get right back up again when it gets hard. And it's then you go back and you go, I'm grateful for these situations. I'm grateful for the injuries, and it creates something incredible in people. So I so completely resonate with it as well. And that's where that sensitivity is like, this has made me who I am, so strong. So these awareness things, it's built this in me. And then you become pretty unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of times I've been asked the question of if you could change anything when you were younger, what would you change? Or if you could tell yourself something as a younger age, what would you tell them? And I'd be like, every single time I'm like, nah, nothing. I wouldn't, if I want to change something from when I was younger, that's me resenting something that's happened, which means I've not let go of everything. So I'd be like, that's kind of a backwards question, in the fact that you're not really I know you're trying to dig for something for a younger person to learn off early doors, but actually the best thing about being young is the fact that you learn them yourself. And a class what would you tell? Nothing, absolutely nothing. I'd live my life exactly the same way. I have done things that I would never do again, don't get me wrong. But I'm happy I've done them, because I've done them and I've learned from them.
Yeah.
Whereas if I don't ever do them, then I don't. And I guess the classic thing is you've just got to live. At the end of the day, bad things happen. Bad things happen. That is unfortunately life. It's not necessarily it's the end of the world. It's just a case of sometimes things are horrendous, and it really does take time to get past it or get through it or work through it. But that is life. It's not. It's the classic, you go into a business and you don't get the job. Normally you'd ask for feedback from the interview. It's the same with everything. Always ask for feedback when you get that opportunity, because they're probably the best people that can give it to you. And if it's not good feedback, I genuinely would well, it's not the job for me, or actually I'm going to question you on the feedback. I want some good feedback so I can actually better myself, rather than the classic, we just went with someone else. Yeah, but why? What's the next bit? Like, how have you chosen that person over me? Like, not in terms of I'm the best person, they're not. It's more a case of like, what are they doing differently that I'm not? And kind of, I think whether you're a person or an athlete, like you have to question yourselves in terms of just have, as you say, that self-awareness, which you do learn. It doesn't come straight out of the womb and straight away, I'm not very good at anything at the moment. It's like, it doesn't happen. But unfortunately, as you say, like, I think the minute you get a setback, or the first setback you get is that, or setback as people call it, that first conversation, you have that opportunity to either go, okay, well, what can I improve? Or you go, they're not right. It's not for me, this. And I think every single time you get that window of opportunity, it's still an opportunity to then question and ask. Every time you knock it back, you furthermore just limit your chance of getting that self-awareness. Whereas the minute you open that door open, because you've had the conversation once, it's actually not that bad a conversation. So then the next time, if it happens, you have the conversation again, because you know it's not bad because you've already had that. I still get the fear of answering the phone from the coach. I still get the fear. I'm 28 and I still get nervous about answering the phone because I've had bad experiences as a kid. But naturally, the more you pick it up, the easier it becomes and the more comfortable you are in that situation.
Yeah.
I'm so much more comfortable meeting somebody face to face, because normally if you're face to face, normally it's going to be delivered in a really nice way and it's actually a lot easier. Whereas on the phone, you never know. You never know how it's delivered. It's the classic, like, I can't tell sarcasm over text. No idea. Absolutely no idea. But it's funny, like that. Those kinds of things always shape your life without you realizing.
And if there's always something that comes to mind for me as well, is whoever's listening, or even saying it to myself or whatever, is it's never too late to have the courage to ask for the feedback, to have the honesty with yourself and look at yourself in the mirror, because there are people at all ages going through that thing. No matter how many failures you face and how strong you think you are, you'll be set back down again, and then it might take you a year to recover from it. And then you have to go back and ask yourself and have the courage to do that. Or when you're 40, 50, 60, never dealt with it, avoided it all your life, it's never too late to then go and ask that question of the feedback, or the self-honesty and the awareness, and look at yourself and break that down, because that is where it all lies. Like you said, that is the opportunity in itself to have that perspective where it can turn you, or you can learn from it. And that's all the difference is.
Yeah, exactly. I think I know everyone talks about this growth mindset and all that side of like the perfect human or whatever it is, but I do believe that you're always learning. And whether it's going to be straightforward or not, I think the fun bit is the challenge of it and kind of really understanding.
Yeah.
And that for me is such a driver for myself as a person, like just having that awareness to be like, if somebody's like, oh, you're not that good at something at the moment. So at the moment, I'm learning a completely new skill in hockey at the that I've never really learned before. And I'm getting one-to-one tuition at 28. I'm learning something from scratch. And I'm actually really enjoying the challenge of learning it. And every time he teaches me a little part of it, and bear in mind, this is a Belgian man, fantastic coach, teaching English guy. There's obviously a difference in terms of the understanding of the words and difference in terms of the phrases used and things like that. So the beauty of it is the fact that I'm constantly asking him questions about it. So I gain as much understanding of why I'm doing a certain way to others, for example. But the beauty is because I'm asking the questions, because partly there's a little bit of a language barrier, which there isn't really. But I'm also trying to understand as much as I can. So then actually when I'm doing it, I'm like, yeah, this makes a lot more sense. And if I'm not doing it right, so for example, I'm on my own, I can automatically go and give myself feedback from it and be like, yeah, that's not great. And obviously as a perfectionist, that's quite a dangerous place to be. But at the same time, what I know is if I get all the information from him and I know it feels right and I know it looks right, then I know it is right. Whereas the minute I don't get that understanding and everything else, I'm kind of like, oh, have I done it right? So when I'm delivering a piece of information to somebody, like let's say, for example, having been a coach at my old club as a second team men's coach, having that conversation with people to actually deliver information, I'm kind of in my head, I'm constantly processing, being like, is this the right way to deliver it? Is this the right way to deliver it? In the hope that I'm delivering it not in a you're not good enough. It's in a I'm trying to make you better. I'm trying to help to make you better.
Yeah.
And that for me is like, I think the conversations are always, it's always a dangerous thing because, as you say, it's never too late, but there's always that nervousness of, oh, what happens if this isn't received that well? Or what happens if I ask it quite aggressively? And that kind of question, whereas actually it goes back for me to the authenticity side of things. If you're genuinely want to get better and you want to learn, no matter how it comes across, you'll always find a way to explain it. So it's not a bad way to do it because you'll always find the right way to go about it. So me saying like, I'm not, or a coach telling me I'm not good enough. If I genuinely want to know, I'd be like, okay, well, I won't be like, why haven't you picked me? My way of phrasing it would be, oh, well, how can I improve? So I'm naturally, because of the fact that I do want to get better and I do want to learn, I'm able to ask that question straight away in the right way. I think that's kind of, it's always the fear, but of people wanting feedback or asking for feedback is, oh, what if this comes across badly? It just won't do if you're going about it the right way and you genuinely want to find out.
And on the flip side, when you're receiving it and you're picking up the call, it's also the courage to go, well, to do it regardless of this could trigger my fear. This could trigger them telling me I'm not good enough or whatever. And again, if you're not facing that and you're not honest with yourself that it exists and you're aware of it, then it's going to come up and express itself in anger and complaining and obviously throwing that tantrum because you don't quite understand it and know it. So it's really interesting. But what really gets me from kind of the way you talk and the way you see things are like these two traits, the curiosity in the learning and everything, and the humility to have that curiosity. It's like they're so fundamental in someone, and it's so cool to see that.
So I did a piece of work. I'll see if I can find it because I'm trying to find. Oh, nips. So there's a piece of work I did with a lifestyle advisor. She's a fantastic lady, a woman called Emma Mitchell. She was an incredible sports lady in her time, and she's now a phenomenal lifestyle advisor with the GB stuff. We did this piece of work where it's like a list of like 60 traits.
Yeah.
You had to rank them in always, sometimes, rarely, never, in terms of where they sit.
Yeah.
So down at the bottom, I had like fashion was down at the bottom. I'm not cool. So things like that. So like money, things like that were not really my drivers as a person. And the top 7, I had like a list of 7. Courage was at the top. Achievement and success. Honesty, authenticity, trust, humor, and curiosity. So they were my 7. And that's kind of like, and then, so I did that. And then, hold on, I need to shrink this screen on this. Because then we went from that, we did a piece of work. So the why stuff kind of is basically, so you basically come out with a phrase at the end of the why work. So the work we did with the psychologists, and one of the pieces, there we go. Yeah. Always valued courage, achievement, success, honesty and integrity, curiosity, freedom, and humor. So they're the big ticket items for me.
Say that again. Can you say that again?
So courage, achievement and success, honesty and integrity, curiosity, freedom, and humor.
I love it.
Freedom's the big one for me because it kind of gives me that, like, I hate being boxed in a room. I hate it. I can't stand it. So actually, I think
that's something that I resonate a lot with in that, and it comes out especially in the performance, is when you're playing with the insecurity and the fear and all those things, you're almost kind of suffocating yourself like that. You kind of, like, I keep it in my shoulders and you go inside yourself. And then when you're playing with lighter and freer, the difference of the enjoyment is like the playfulness and the lightness and that childlike kind of curiosity comes out because of the freedom that comes from your own perspective and stuff like that. So I relate massively to that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a conventional player, and I wouldn't say I'm a conventional person either. Like I've always liked, like, So I lived abroad for a year in 2016 in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And the coach I had out there, I was just playing abroad, just basically plying my trade after university.
Yeah.
And he used to call me the wild horse. Never really understood the reference, but he was just like, just go out and play. Like, I'm not going to tell you how to play. You know how to play.
Yeah.
And to be told that like a 22-year-old kid is quite a cool thing, because he's just like, yeah, go do it. Go have some fun. Me being that kind of kid, I was like, oh, wicked, this is awesome. But it's like, it's giving that like kind of freedom to a player to be like, I have full confidence in you. Go and play a trade.
And
so my why is, funnily enough, got loads. So my why, so what basically I live my life by day to day, is to have courage and humility in day-to-day interactions, so that everyone has the opportunity to explore their own honesties, freedoms, and curiosities.
Like it.
So that's equivalently like what you've just said in terms of that kind of stuff, is kind of what I hold dear to me, is basically giving people the opportunity to go and be themselves. And it took myself a long time to be able to do that myself, let alone help others. But by naturally getting there myself, so it sounds weird, by being a little bit more selfish and making sure I'm okay, means I have a greater capacity to make sure everyone else is okay.
Your darkness shines a light on other people.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of like, it's quite like a backwards way of thinking about it, because naturally you want to go out and help people, but if you're not in a good place yourself, so as you say, like when you take the mick out of someone or something like that, you're saying sometimes it does come from insecurities. It's that kind of principle of, I'm trying to bring a bit of laughter, but because I'm not in a good place, it's probably going to put someone else down. Whereas actually, if you're a bit more secure in yourself and you're a bit more like, you basically like yourself a little bit more, suddenly you'd probably crack a joke, but it's probably not the same. It's not going to have the same impact on somebody negatively. It's probably just going to raise everybody, and kind of that stuff. I just, it's always been a fascination of mine, and hence the second degree and kind of studying the psychology side of things is kind of, I've always been interested in how the team dynamic works and what's the best way to maximize what you've got in there. And as you say, a lot of it comes down to insecurities and kind of self-awareness, insecurities and vulnerability. And kind of the minute you create that safe space, suddenly people's guards start getting put down. Like suddenly you haven't got 25 walls to break through to get to somebody. You've only got 5, and kind of a lot of it comes from the top, but also the minute you start instilling like your values into and get people to understand you, suddenly they start to understand themselves a little bit better around who you are. And don't get me wrong, there's so many things that it could be, but it's kind of, for me, it's always been a fascination on that side of things.
It 100% is. This brings me back to like the Dalai Lama saying, like, selfishness is, and like kind of inward, kind of narcissism, and spending your time focusing on yourself is the source of all suffering. And why selfishness is in giving and generosity. And because you're not only helping them, but you're helping yourself. And I talk about it too much on the podcast, so I'm not going to bring up the Book of Joy. Like, that is like my all-time go-to. I'll show you afterwards. But that whole thing, it's incredible. And it is that whole thing where a lot of people, mirror the depths at which you go to. And so if you're going to be someone that is open and honest and vulnerable, people will feel the space to do that. And at the same time, if you're closed, then they're obviously going to be closed. And for the people that are unaware of these stuff within themselves, the impact that you can help have probably in an unaware way on these people is incredible. And then, like you said, the depth at which you interact with people has come from understanding your own depths and your own sensitivities and vulnerabilities. And it's something that I think I'm just as we're equally passionate about. And it's really cool to see that happening and that being such an important thing at this level, and sport realizing it and seeing it to an extent, or at least you individually applying that to your team and environment.
Yeah, I did a presentation for the England under-16 hockey boys. So I know one of the lead coaches there, and he was like, look, do you want to come and chat to him? I was like, yeah, happily. This was during lockdown. And I think I went for a different approach that he probably expected. Yeah. Because I think they were expecting me to be like, yeah, it's the world's perfect and this is great and it's the best job in the world. And I was like, it's not.
Yeah.
But I love what I do. And one of the things I did with them was kind of like to start them on the journey a bit, I was like, look, I'm just going to ask you a question, basically an interactive question on, oh God, what's it called? I was just going to, hold on. I've got it here in front of me. So called Menti. I don't know if you ever come across the website. So Menti, the principle of it is basically, if you have a phone, you can log onto the Menti website. So I post a question on it. So for example, one of the questions was like, what's one of the happiest memories that you have, or the top 3 memories you have as a kid? And it'll give you 3 spaces where you can write them down. And then you basically put the website up on the screen, and you can see all their answers coming in. So you can see everything. And if people have common ones, the words get bigger. So the same words basically enlarged, then you see what the common themes are. So I did this with the under 16 boys, and I was like, look, like I'm just intrigued. Like, what do you guys like think is the most positive things? And like they range from like Christmas, for example, like where obviously all the families together, to winning gold at an under 16 tournament, like that kind of stuff. And then I was like, look, like I'm going to ask you a pretty difficult question here, and feel free to go as in depth as you want, but what's the toughest memory that you've come across so far? And I'm thinking 15, 16, there's going to be 1 or 2 that are going to be pretty dark. There's going to be a few that aren't bad at all. So a few were like, I didn't get selected for my school under 14 team, for example. Like that was a pretty dark memory for somebody. And then another one is like a heavy family illness or a death or something like that. But I started off by going, I'm going to put mine out, like they're there.
Creating that space.
Feel free to go as deep as you want to go, and I'm not going to judge anything of it. And I spoke to the coaches afterwards, because they went, to be fair, they went full depth of it. And I was like, I said to them,
Were they named? Like
no. So it's anonymous. So that's the beauty of it, is the fact that it gives you that space to be like, 1, I've shown vulnerability. And 2, it's a safe space because no one's going to judge you for anything. So there were a few jokey answers in there, which is like people who are obviously a little bit insecure about it. But then the minute you see someone else do it, then you're like, I've missed my opportunity there. So the beauty of it is the fact that even if you post one answer, you can post again. So what I found was that the joke answers would come through, and then there would be like 5 or 6 serious answers. Then everybody would finish. And then once everybody's finished, you'd then see like 2 or 3 come back in. So from the original jokes would then come back in and do it authentically. And I was like, I said to them, I was like, that's the bit that you want, is the juiciness. Is not necessarily like, don't get me wrong, the stuff that's on there is amazing, but the fact that people are going in there, seeing the authenticity, and then going, okay, I'm actually going to do it properly. It's like, that's the big ticket item, because then people are wanting to engage. And I was fascinated by just how in depth they went. But then I was like, I took a step back afterwards, and I was like, exactly what we just said then. I was like, I've shown vulnerability. There's a safe space. Then all the juicy bits come, and that's where everything comes in. And I'm like, that is like the bang on way of kind of like, it's just really interesting for me to kind of like see it firsthand, rather than previously. I've always been that person that has been part of the ones that engage, and then step back and be like, that was really clever from them. I was like, the first time I was like, I've actually done pretty well there. But it's just interesting that like, even at 15, 16, you can see it happening, but because it was never done to me as a kid like that. It was a completely different way. So it kind of 10 years on, you can see already how it's changing and how people are going about it in a different way. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think like you in that kind of thing is that I aspire to use this platform and these opportunities that we have from our own awareness and our own experiences to help other people with that. The ultimate dream is obviously being the football with that incredible, kind of platform that it has, and the same with you being, a men's senior GB player, that there is that platform and that that kind of idolized kind of thing that people look up to, and being able to use that is just, it's an incredible thing. And again, being able to help the world that we live in, for people that value depth. And I think, again, we've kind of said over the last hour how important that is, to be honest and to be vulnerable and to know yourself. I think that, the culture and the world is slightly, is catching on with it, because, even as I'm still young, but even as a kid, you don't learn these mental kind of attributes and this awareness, and it's not taught in school, and it's all these kind of different things. And, a vulnerability, especially in male alpha sports, are such a weakness, and seen, why would we have these things? So to be going back and helping these generations to learn these things with their mind and to learn themselves and to do it from such an early age, that's incredible. Like, that is so exciting to see young kids learning that emotional intelligence and that awareness from such an early age. Like, that's the really cool stuff.
I think it's a lot of it helps with siblings as well. I think naturally having brothers and sisters or having families with kids of a similar age is kind of that. I think makes a huge difference in terms of the development of that emotional intelligence. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, having older sisters, your younger sisters, or older brothers, younger brothers, like obviously that you have fights and things like that, but more often than not, what happens is you kind of sort it out with yourselves. And if you don't, there's probably something there is probably an insecurity there or something that's stopping it. I think that's always been like my fascination with that, because I've got two older sisters, and actually, like, when I was growing up, I was closer to one, and then as I got a little bit older, I was closer to another. And then now, at the age that I'm now equally close with them, because I'm at that age where now I can actually, like, I understand their life context, my life context, everything that's going on suddenly becomes that much easier. But there was definitely a period where I was closer to one and not to the other, and I was like, it makes no sense, because at the end of the day, but then I was like, interactions, you spend time more with one, like this, that, and the other, like there's so many different things that impact it. But it's just really interesting, like that, as you say, that emotional intelligence from an early age is so difficult to come by. I wonder if it's a curriculum thing or whatever it may be, or whether it's an external thing that you basically make compulsory within schools. Like, I don't know, but there's probably a world in which there is space for it, and it's just trying to understand the best way to get it delivered. And funnily enough, sport is probably quite a great way to do it, because you're putting a bit more context on teamwork and that side of things. So suddenly the intelligence kind of understanding a bit more of how people work, rather than like your classic maths or English, where you normally it's you on your own, or science might be the only other thing where you work in teams and things like that to try and solve an experiment. But that sports is normally the way in which you can probably deliver it. I don't know how it would look, but there's definitely a way in, I think, with that side of things.
I mean, this is what I preach to pretty much everyone, is that the world is going that way, and it's becoming more important. And I think my thing, and I say this again all the time, is that we look at mental health and we react. We're very reactive to it. Oh, I'm depressed, or I'm struggling with panic attacks and anxiety or whatever. And so now I have to go see therapy and now see a counselor, instead of now where it's changing the culture of looking after our physical health. Oh, I want to stay healthy. I'm going to eat well and go to the gym and look after my health and save, the problems coming in 20, 30 years. And so I think it's coming, and it's, it will come, and it's growing and growing and growing. You look at like Headspace and the meditation apps, they have an incredible impact on that. But looking at it proactively is, I'm going to learn to deal with myself. I'm going to learn to deal with who I am and what I hold and everything that is a part of me, to then deal with everyone else better and to improve, to work on that life. And I think we can't just rely on bad times and suffering.
Yeah.
For those, like, for example, in our experiences, they've come from difficult situations. You're only going to gain your self-awareness and your self-awareness and self-understanding and self-knowledge from these bad experiences at the moment. So can we help people to learn that, so that then when the next one comes, they get slightly more out of it and they see the lesson and the opportunity in it slightly sooner, to then grow in whatever. But it's going there, and no matter how slowly or whatever, it will do. And then you'll see I believe that these things will be applied in so many different situations. So it's exciting, but it's cool to see at the top now.
Yeah, I think the big thing is education. Like, as you say, like that is at the end of the day, that's the thing that stops everything. Like, whether it's with Brexit and things like that, or whether it's you looking at it from a completely different side. And as you're saying, that mental health side of it is, we're only just scratching the surface of it. As you say, like, as you said earlier on, like the nutrition side has only really come in the past 5-6 years, and that's become a huge part of it all. the next thing is probably the psychology of it, and it's probably going to come in stages in terms of that mental health aspect.
It's so vast.
Yeah, so I think what's going to happen is that naturally it's just going to start creeping in a little bit, and I think there's going to be, basically it's become more and more of an educational tool, and then suddenly I genuinely think in schools in like 15, 20 years, there's probably going to be people coming in with classes being like delivering it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a negative thing. I think that's only a positive thing, because naturally then you suddenly get people who just understand themselves a bit better. And the minute you have somebody who understands themselves a bit better is the minute you have a more secure person, which then leads to so much easier communications in school. And then suddenly you've got kids that aren't behaving anywhere near as badly. You've got actually kids who start to understand themselves a bit more, and also you've got teachers who understand the kids a bit more. So there's always that kid in school that no one could get through to apart from one teacher, and it was always the one teacher that would have to deal with it, because the teacher took time to understand the kid, or had previously had a similar thing through childhood, that then means they're able to actually speak to the kid, and they gain that trust and that understanding. It's always the same. Like for me, of having seen it happen multiple times, like there's always that way of communicating, and it's just trying to make that a little bit more a group understanding rather than it just being one teacher that's able to deal with it. Suddenly the kid then understands it a little bit more, and the other teachers suddenly understand it a bit more, and everything suddenly becomes that much easier. But for me, it's kind of like, it's not straightforward, but at the same time, it's not hard. It's just an education thing.
Well, the realistic thing is it goes back to the facts, and that we're literally in a mental health crisis at the moment. You look at everything, and it's like I think I saw like 1 in 10 people attempt or think about committing. No, I want to say 1 in 5 or even less. What attempt or think about committing suicide. Like in your life. So like I think it's even, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's ridiculous. And it's like 1 in 2 people have mental health issues in their life at the moment. And we look at the problems at the moment, and it is a crisis. And no matter how relaxed I say, the slow progress is progress, it's the worst it's ever been. So there's space for something to be done fairly urgently, which would be interesting. I want to kind of maybe bring up a little bit more, like understand it in a more pragmatic, logical way. So if we take your ACL injury, which you described earlier as not so big an injury, which I still haven't gotten over yet. Like this is a career ender in like so many different situations. And it's, if we kind of break that down, and obviously that was kind of a year and a bit ago, and understand how you approach that, how from everything you've learned, and like you said, in the journey that you're on, how you saw the opportunity, and how that got you to Tokyo in a real kind of, I guess, pragmatic, logical way of what we've talked about for the last year, and how you approached it and learned from it.
It was. I say it wasn't that bad, because it was literally all that happened was I had an ACL rupture and half of my calf tore.
Oh, that's all that happened.
But the beauty of basically, so the calf took majority of the toll, which normally the knee would. So actually there was no meniscus damage. There was no damage to any of the ligaments. So it sounds weird, but I was really lucky that my calf basically took a lot of the strain.
That's interesting.
So literally I felt a pop, and then my calf basically really hurt. And that was about it. So I was actually like quite lucky on it. So when the doctors told me, I didn't believe them at first. I was like, nah, I can walk on this. I'm fine. They were like, yeah, you can walk on it, but it's ruptured. So I was like, so I literally left to the sinks, and I was about to throw up everywhere. I felt so ill. I was like, this is horrible news. And then after about 15, 20 minutes, I was like, oh, this is pretty crap. And then for the next half an hour, I just cried. And luckily, one of the women's cycles goalkeepers had a similar injury. So basically came in and was just like, just let it all out now. Basically just get out all your emotion now. So I was literally, for 30 minutes, I was in absolute pieces. And then I basically spoke to the doctor, and I was like, this was when, so I did it in October 2019. And then the games were still going ahead. So Tokyo was still going ahead in July 2020. So I said to them, like, what are the chances? And they were like, it's slim. And I was like, okay, what are the chances? And they were like, yeah, it's slim. I was like, yeah, but do I still have a chance? They were like, yeah. I was like, fine, then let's go. And so I was like, that's it. I'm just going to be a robot from now on. So I actually went into full survival mode of basically, I'm just going to attack this. And the reason I went with that mindset was that if I gave myself any opportunity to slip up, I probably would have done. So what I did is I basically, for the next, would have been 6 months, no, 5 months, I basically just went hammer and tong at it and just attacked it. So this was during lockdown. So I actually moved in with my girlfriend, who also lived with one of the other athletes, male athletes. So it was actually quite a really good environment for me to be in there. So I basically just for 5 months just went after it. Then news came. So we got the news in March that it was going to be cancelled and it was going to be postponed a year. And I had like a month where I just stopped everything. So all rehab processes. So I was at home, I was doing running and things like that. And it might have been May actually. I was quite late on and I just stopped everything and just did nothing.
Why do you think that was?
I was exhausted, man.
Yeah.
I was absolutely exhausted. So I'd gone 5 days a week, 2 sessions a day, maybe 6 days a week, 2 sessions a day, and just attacked everything head on. And I was just drained. And I was like, I've given this absolutely everything and I've got no outcome. And so for a month, I just sat on the sofa and the girlfriend was like, are you going to do anything at some point or are you just going to mope around? And I was like, I'm just knackered. And the physios and the S&C guys were the best for this because they just went, do you know what, have your space. Because everything got postponed a year, I had a lot longer to play with. So they were like, look, you've made an amazing progress here. What you're going to do now isn't necessarily going to hurt it. So don't stress, just whenever you're ready, come back to us type thing. And for me, that was the perfect way to deal with me. So they not only treated me as an athlete throughout the past 5 months, they also treated me as a human. They were like, yeah, he looks knackered. Yeah, let's give him some time.
Took the pressure and perfectionism off your shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, and kind of the streets I'd made in terms of the physical nature. Like I'm nowhere near the same athlete that I was then because I had 5 months where I wasn't running. I was literally just in the gym, just lifting things. So actually the strength that I had was something I probably won't ever get back until I finish my career, unfortunately, because naturally, whenever you're running around, you're naturally not going to be able to carry as much weight. So actually for me, the best thing that happened was I had a month off to basically recharge. And I was like, eventually I messaged them just being like, right, I'm good to go. And so we just started building everything up again. And thankfully I had a season of basically playing again. So actually what would have been, I think originally there was a plan that I had 3 games before selection and I had to basically prove that I could play to be able to go. Whereas this time I had a season where I could get basically hockey under the belt again with 10 centimeters less of a hamstring and kind of let's just attack it. And for me, that was kind of the best thing that, again, I'm probably one of the only people that wasn't too bothered about Tokyo being postponed. Don't get me wrong, not exactly the best circumstances for it to happen, but in terms of that side of things, I think I would have made it genuinely if it was still in 2020, but what it has done is prolong my career for sure. Just in terms of the stress that my body was under and physically and mentally, actually, I then had a proper 12 months to really build everything up, which was pretty awesome. So from that point of view, kind of, yeah, my preparation for an Olympic Games wasn't exactly normal, but at the same time, I wouldn't change it. Like, as I say, like, I don't think the injury was that bad. It's bad, but I don't think it was that bad. Yeah. I've had worse. So for me, that kind of perspective on it automatically was then, it was just more the timing of it, but actually the timing still gave me a chance. So I went into full athlete survival mode. So I went into an MJ mode where I just went and just attacked everything. And that's great for a short period of time. But for me, I could not last for long in that world because it's just not me as a human. Yeah. I'm determined, but I also need that little bit of freedom outside to be able to be like, oh, I want to go see my mates. Oh, I want to go see these people. And that was obviously a combination of lockdown and training. I mean, made it pretty difficult, but yeah, I wouldn't say it was unconventional.
Wild horse in you again.
Yeah, I'd say it's unconventional, but for me, like, yeah, I was pretty like, I just kind of, I don't know, I just don't worry about them anymore. I don't know why. I think experience helps with that side of things. So kind of every day was a new day, and the beauty of it is I was doing exercises that I'd never done before. So then I would start questioning. I was basically questioning physios and S&C guys, being like, is this the only way I can do this? Or is there another way I can do this? So what we got to the stage of, there was like, we had different challenges every week. We had different quizzes on the board every week. I started to go bouldering again, which I had done before the injury. So I kind of just went a different way about doing it. And I made sure that those guys were going to join in with what I was doing, because I think normally when you get a big injury, if there's someone else there with you, it does make it a lot easier. Whereas I was on my own for quite a lot of it, but actually I wasn't really on my own. I had people around, and kind of, I was quite happy just kind of doing something different for a little bit, because it helped me question a lot more, which was great for me.
Well, it really sounds just like you've implemented your why and your motto and kind of that kind of thing, because you gave yourself the space to be curious and to learn, you know, by doing that. And obviously you had the courage to instigate it, which is just as important, doing it from an authentic space. So doing that is obviously, it makes it possible. And I think what it boils down to is that your knowledge of yourself, to go, I can push myself to this limit. This is, you know, the end goal. This is a situation. I know myself. I know what I can do here. This is what I'm going to do. And then also the strength to go, I'm taking this break now. No, like I'm doing this for me. I need to recover, because that black and white life, which I don't know about you, but that's one of my biggest coping mechanisms, the splitting between black and white, absolute full survival, like tiger, or, you know, complete opposite, rest, recover, and do nothing. And that isn't sustainable as a human, and it's not, I'd say, the best way to live and to get the most out of life. But it is a coping mechanism, but fully aware of that. That's how it works. But I think knowing yourself that's what comes out of it for me, and those decisions and all that. How was Tokyo itself?
Yeah, it was good. It's quite a hard thing to get your head around. Like, being an Olympian is quite a weird thing to say. Because it's at one hand, you're like, it was a pretty unbelievable experience. But on the flip side, it's like, we didn't exactly get what we wanted to get out of it. So kind of like, I'm always torn when people like, so you've asked the right question. You were like, how has it been in Tokyo? It's like the right question, where it's like, yeah, it was actually pretty unbelievable. Like, just everything, how they managed to get it to happen whilst during COVID is ridiculous. It really is. And there were no cases in the village. Like, they were so clever on it. But then I'm like, some people ask like, oh, it must have been a pretty unbelievable experience. I'm like, yeah. They're like, did you enjoy it? And I'm like, that's a hard question to answer, because at the end of the day, like, became knocked out in the quarterfinal.
Yeah.
So that achievement success that I hold so high, I'm like, that hurts. And that, I still think about it now. That quarterfinal for sure, because I'm always questioning it. But in terms of, as an experience, unbelievable. But would I do things differently now to make sure it wouldn't happen again how it did? Yeah, 100%. And do I feel I've learned from it? Yeah, 100%. So kind of like, everything that I'm trying to get out of it is to make sure I maximize what I've got out of it, so it doesn't happen again in the same way. But at the same time, I think at the end of my career, I'll look back and be like, yeah, Tokyo was pretty cool. But whilst I'm still in it, I know there's so much more that I want to do and change, that actually means it wasn't as great as what I wanted it to be. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in the long run, as long as I make sure I go about it the right way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, like, this is always something I'm really torn between as an athlete, because if you fully accept the situation, then you lose a little bit of that edge. And it's like playing, like, you know, I love obviously the ideas of the Buddhism and the Zen and the complete acceptance and humility around it. But at the same time, as an athlete, you need a bit of that to then get more out of yourself. Sure. And so it's like, you know, if I ask you now, have you fully accepted Tokyo? No. and so you'd go, oh, that's like, you know, you'd want the perfect Zen, you know, complete stillness answers to say, yes, I'm at peace with it, and now I move forward. But there's a bit of that drive and that pain and that fuel that you use in that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the funny thing is the drive that I have at the moment is based around a negative feeling. But what it will turn into is eventually a positive feeling, and it'll take some time for sure. And it'll probably take the next time I play a game for GB for me to get to that point. But for the time being, that's my motivation, is the fact that I'm not letting this happen again. So it's a fear of failure at the moment, whereas what it will eventually turn into is motivation to basically be the best that I can be, and not just be the best I can be, but be the best that we can be. So then what it changes into is that positive way of going about it. And that's probably once I'm back in the environment again. But whilst I'm outside of it, that's for sure my motivation. And it's funny, as you say, like, it's a backwards way of getting to where you want to get to, but I've also got the knowledge and perspective that it will get to that stage. It's just not right now.
Well, that's where the acceptance is.
Yeah.
The acceptance is knowing that you're lacking a little, like, you're not lacking, but the acceptance is knowing that there is pain there that will be released and will come and turn into something positive.
Exactly. It's awareness to know that there is something there that's not quite right still. And I'm okay with that because I know it's there. And I think the danger comes is when I don't accept it and I don't think it's there. And then suddenly I have irrational outbursts and I have explosions, and kind of what I'm actually doing is actually understanding it a lot more now from like, yeah, it's still not healed, and that's fine. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But at some point, I know I've also got to let it go and kind of change the motivation from it being I don't want this to happen again, to being do you know what, I'm going to go about it a little bit differently to make sure that I maximize what I've got and what I can bring to the group.
Well, that is the problem with this culture of, do or die kind of thing, is that a lot of these guys, Goggins and stuff like that, incredible people, done incredible things. And obviously we idolize and we're inspired by them, but they're running off so much pain. Is that sustainable? And you're breaking yourself, and you're destroying that human in you. And what it kind of, the maturity, like the emotional maturity, and again, the self-understanding, is that you can still value achievement and success up there, but not be fully identified with it, and still be okay if it's not always being ticked. Like I'm still okay whilst that isn't perfect. And that's a huge thing with insecurity and knowing yourself and self-love in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of, I think the interesting thing on that is as you say, one of my mates uses this phrase and it's beautiful. He calls it's understanding that being perfectly imperfect is the right way to go about it. It's not necessarily imperfectly perfect, which is what people assume it is.
Yeah.
So kind of like you get a gold medal and suddenly everyone's like, the best person in the world. Like Usain Bolt is the classic example of like, he's the best person in the world. And it's like, yeah, but there's probably a lot going on that you don't know that's probably not quite right. Whereas what we're trying to get, like, I guess my mindset is kind of, I know I've got limitations, but actually that's not necessarily say I'm not good. It's actually understanding that by being perfectly imperfect, I just appreciate who I am and what I'm going about and how I'm going about it. So then 30 years down the line, I'm a great dad. I've got kids. I've got a wonderful wife. I've got a wonderful house. I've got dogs. I've got everything that I've ever wanted. And actually, like, that's a good place. That's a great place to be, rather than, I might not have a medal at the end of the day, but as long as I can look back on my career and go, do you know what? I didn't waste a minute. And I loved every second that I was out there. That's a completely different feeling to go in. Yeah, I've got a few medals, but I didn't really enjoy what I was doing. And kind of, for me, that enjoyment side of thing is the bit of fulfillment that I've always looked for in sport, and kind of I've always managed to get in sport. And I don't know if that's because of my personality or I've just been lucky with the groups that I've got around me, but I've always been blessed with great people around. And kind of that for me is always the big ticket item, is just making sure that I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And kind of, yeah, I think it's so important.
It's to add on to that great dad kind of thing. It's also like knowing in that perfect scenario that you're still going to have, difficulties, insecurities, anxieties, whilst being a perfect dad in a perfect house and perfect dogs or whatever.
Oh, for sure. Like I mean, the situation that I was in during lockdown was one of the most bizarre in terms of living with a girlfriend who I'd only dated for a very short time. But it was a case of, we either date and it works out or it doesn't, or we don't, in which case it's not going to work out. So you kind of like, well, there's nothing to lose there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same scenario for me with like being a dad. Is kind of like, there are going to be times where I'm going to have no idea what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
but I've got to problem solve. Well, fine. Well, actually, what I've done my whole career is during the whole time I've been out on the hockey pitch, I've problem solved. Mm-hmm. There's been a problem in front of me and I have to problem solve. And if I don't do it well enough, it probably costs us a goal. But then what I've got to do is I've got to learn from it to make sure it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. And all that happens is I'm just reprinting my mind basically in terms of how to problem solve. But instead of it being a hockey ball in the goal, it's now a kid and keeping it alive. Right, okay. Yeah. I can probably do a lot more with that because naturally your fight or flight mode kicks in then. Mm-hmm. So I think from that point of view, like I've relished the idea of it. I'm actually really excited for that side of things. Mm-hmm. But it comes back to making sure that if I'm not in a good place, or if my partner's not in a good place, that's probably just as important in terms of making sure that we're okay. Because the minute, as I said earlier, the minute we're okay is the minute we can help everybody else that's going on around us. And kind of that's the big thing for me, is making sure we're in the right place mm-hmm. mentally. And that's, again, it's a learning curve.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of kind of, as long as I'm learning. If I'm not learning and I'm making the same mistakes, then we've got a problem. But in which case I've got to talk about it, or else it's going to be a major problem. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool and really well put. I think it's been like an extraordinarily kind of just, I thank you for coming to the depths of like yourself and myself. It's certainly made me kind of curious and question myself, and you've given me, that's like, we've given each other the space to kind of talk about those things, which is really cool. The one last question kind of always ask, and I'm interested to see what you'll say, is what makes you more than just Brendan Creed, the hockey player? What makes you Brendan Creed, the human?
I think curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's wanting to engage with people when I hear something that's not normal. Mm-hmm. So me as a person, I'm quite a loud person, but I don't get drawn to other loud people. I get drawn to smaller personalities, because normally the ones who are quieter are normally the ones who are a bit more secure in themselves. Mm-hmm. So actually then what I find is there's a lot more authenticity with mm-hmm. quieter people. So for me, curiosity has always been the thing that kind of has kept me a human rather than being just an athlete, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It's
probably an odd answer, but
no, I love it. It gives you the space to learn, and by learning, again, it creates your humility, and by being humble, it creates it creates the courage, and it creates the security in yourself, and you learn more about yourself and thus about other people, which is what you've stood for the whole, in the last couple of hours. So it all makes sense. Thank you very, very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.
And yeah, thank you very much.